Alright, one more to go. This time I'm going to give you a graph to start with. I'm going to say write a sinusoidal function that represents that graph. So when I say that, it could be sine or it could be a cosine. They're the same thing. It's describing the motion of the graph. It's not describing sine or cosine. So what we would do here is identify these key things. And to do that, the easiest thing to identify is the amplitude. It's not the top of the graph. You finding the total distance from top to bottom. So what you would want to do to find amplitude is find a point at the top, find a point at the bottom, and find that distance. So this is 6 high. This is 2 low. So what's the distance between 6 and -2? It's 8. So take that number, divide by 2, and you have 4. Your amplitude is 4. What that means is that halfway between these two graphs is 4 away from the top and 4 away from the bottom. So what that also tells you is that if I count 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks away, I have a midline. And this distance is 4, and this distance is 4, and 4, and 4, and 4. So that checks out. So the midline we can find is at a height of 2. So now we have our vertical stretch, we have our vertical shift. We just need to figure out where we're starting our graph from. And we're pretty much already done. And within the period. So period is actually pretty easy to calculate off a graph. All you have to do is find 2 points that, like this right here. Well, let's find something that's easy to work with, like pi. So here's 0. We follow this graph until we get right back to that spot, which is right there. That distance is pi, because then it's going to repeat the cycle. So the period is pi. So if the period is pi, the frequency is 2 pi over the period. So the frequency is 2. This is our b value in our function, which we'll go over in a minute. So we have all the big stuff. All we need to do is figure out our horizontal shift. We'll figure that out in a second. Let's start writing the equation. I'm going to write a few different ones. If we started, the easiest would be a sine function, because it's right on the midline, right at 0. So we would write y equals, and this is increasing, so that's a positive sign. The amplitude is 4 sine. Now the frequency is 2. That's what we're going to write next. And then we're going to figure out our horizontal shift. So we'll say x. Now if we're a sine graph, we should be starting right on the midline, which this already is, and it's happening at the x value of 0, so we are not shifting this. So it's going to be 4 sine of 2x. And we're shifting to a midline of 2. That is our equation. Now I'm also going to give you a cosine function. Same thing. Cool thing is the amplitude will still be 4. Okay, that frequency will still be 2. Here's the deal. If we started here, okay, that would be no shifting. That would be a shift of 0. That would be a sine function. So we can't start in that point for cosine. So we're going to go ahead and figure that out in a second. But everything else stays the same. So the best place to start a cosine graph is at the top. So I would say right there would be a good location for a cosine to begin. And that is at a distance. Now if there are 4 spaces, that's we're dividing into fourths. So that's pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4. So this is pi over 4 to the right. There's your answer. Now you can have a lot of fun with this, and you can actually figure out a negative cosine graph as well. Sometimes this is actually a lot more useful than what we did on the first two. So as I said, everything's going to stay the same. You just have to figure out that horizontal shift. So horizontal shift, the negative cosine would start at the bottom. So we have to figure out what that point is. That's pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4. So x minus 3 pi over 4 to the right. Now we have a negative cosine. And we could do a negative sign if we wanted. A good starting spot for negative sign would be right there. So a negative sign would have a x minus pi, pi over 2. And that's how you do it. It's crazy. You probably, you might enjoy this one day, doing it on a Saturday night, or you might never like it, but that's how it works. Sorry it took so long. Hope this helps a little bit. Good luck.